My longtime friend who is gay will not get married because of the tax consequences of marriage. Says not going to do it. He would actually pay more in income taxes. This country still has a marriage penalty. It's appalling. So I understand it. The other issue here is that the guy my friend is in a relationship with, if they were married, it could potentially cause some problems for work with conflicts of interest. And they're very careful about it, and they've gotten to the point now where his partner, they treat themselves as all but married. They've got wills and they've got healthcare powers of attorney, and they've nominated each other for care and all that stuff. And so his friend does now have to, for his job is in the government, and he has to disclose what my buddy does for a living, and they've got some shared business interests and stuff like that. So they treat it as if it's a marriage, but they won't get married because of the marriage penalty. They both file separate income taxes. I bring that up because that's a common situation in this country still. The gay rights movement wanted marriage. Andrew Sullivan, I've been on his podcast a number of times. He's a philosopher, pundit, thinker, writer, brilliant guy. And he was one of the people who believed that if he's gay, that if gay couples could get married, it would in some ways normalize, civilize something or other. And instead, that the queer rights movement, as he refers to it, has taken it, twisted it, and it hasn't gone exactly the way he thought it would. And he's very hostile to the aggressive transing of kids and things like that. I bring all this up because I do believe Tammy Baldwin, if she were not a lesbian, this would be a scandal that the media couldn't help but cover. Tammy Baldwin is the senator from Wisconsin. She is a lesbian, and she is in a long-term relationship, just like my buddy John is. And my buddy John and his partner, they file appropriate disclosures for his partner's job, and Tammy Baldwin and her partner do not. Tammy Baldwin is the senator from Wisconsin. She's in a swing state. Her popularity is under 50%. She's being challenged by Erick, a popular Republican in Wisconsin. And the media outside of the New York Post doesn't want to talk about Tammy Baldwin. This is from the New York Post. Baldwin co-owns a $1.3 million D.C. penthouse condo with her partner, Wall Street private wealth management advisor Maria Brisbane, but hasn't included any of their jointly owned assets on her financial disclosure reports, despite reporting the assets of her previous partner. In fact, Brisbane has never appeared on the senator's reports. In 2015, Tammy Baldwin might have objected to this arrangement. In a press conference that year introducing her Financial Services Conflict of Interest Act with the late Representative Elijah Cumming of Maryland, the two-term senator declared the American people can't afford to have government officials in the pocket of the financial industry that they are charged with overseeing. Baldwin's bill, meant to close the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington, targeted potential conflicts of interest between the financial sector and those who regulate the industry, including expanding a cooling-off period prohibiting former government employees from lobbying for 2 years. The bill was aimed at the executive branch and did not touch congressional conflicts of interest. Brisbane and Baldwin began dating 6 years before they bought their D.C. condo. Baldwin introduced this legislation 3 years before they began dating. Brisbane is the founder of Brisbane Group, whose archived website from when it was at Merrill Lynch claimed to enhance performance by investing in small biotechnology companies. Brisbane previously managed a biotechnology mutual fund at Merrill Lynch, where she was said to have an appreciation for cutting-edge research that informs her current investments in biotech companies. Brisbane is also on the Cancer Research and Treatment Fund Board of Directors, who rapidly deploy funding to the front lines of research. Senator Baldwin, and all members of Congress for that matter, should adhere to the standards of transparency that were designed to avoid actual and perceived conflicts of interest or personal benefit. The situation raises personal ethical questions and will require additional scrutiny to ensure Senator Baldwin is not taking advantage of her public office for her and her partner's financial gain, according to Caitlin Sutherland of the Americans for Public Trust. So here's the problem. Baldwin met privately with Gina Raimondo, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, to make a final pitch for Wisconsin to win the Phase 2 implementation grant as a biohealth tech hub. Her role wasn't secret. She also chairs the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee for Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education, and Related Agencies, which manages appropriations for the National Institutes of Health. In 2018, a biotech CEO thanked Baldwin for her support after the firm received an award for one of the NIH programs. The CEO donated $4,000 to Baldwin, and she's got this conflict of interest. Between 2018, the year Baldwin began dating Brisbane, and 2020, Health and Human Services and the NIH doled out 71 awards to the tune of $45 million to small businesses that are owned in part by venture capital firms, hedge funds, and or private equity firms. Baldwin and members of Congress in general are not in position to choose grant applications for the funding. They belong to the NIH, but there are well-documented problems with insider trading among members of Congress and influence on what the NIH does. Again, ask yourself if this were a Republican. Ask yourself if this were a married couple. You have a United States senator in charge of a subcommittee that oversees funding in the biotech industry for healthcare, who is in a long-term relationship with an investor and money manager involved in the biotechnology sector. They live in a shared D.C. condo that is worth a lot of money together, and the senator doesn't disclose any of this in her disclosure forms, does not disclose the investments for the partner, doesn't do any of that, and essentially hides behind the fact that they're not married. I bring up my buddy to point out that he and his partner are not married and yet do the disclosures together because though not married, they recognize they're in this long-term relationship with an appearance of could raise an appearance of impropriety and conflict of interest. And yet the senator from Wisconsin, who insists that the executive branch should have to adhere to these standards, refuses to honor the standards she herself believes others in government should do. The minimum account required to work with Tammy Baldwin's partner was $20 million, and her typical client's net worth is between $40 and $200 million, according to Forbes. That's a massive potential conflict of interest. The New York Post is the same organization that went after Hunter Biden's laptop and the rest of the media tried to ignore. The New York Post continues to break these stories the rest of the media ignores because the rest of the media is covering for the Democrats. You know they don't want Republicans to take the Senate, and you know if Tammy Baldwin were an incumbent Republican instead of an incumbent Democrat, or maybe even if Tammy Baldwin was married instead of in a long-term lesbian relationship, they would cover this sort of story. Also, you know, if she were actually married, the government rules would require her to disclose this stuff, but she's not. So you have a senator in charge of steering benefits to biotech companies that her partner potentially maybe invests in, and we don't know because they're ignoring the disclosures on the technicality of they're not married. We've seen the American media cover for Democrats for decades now. It's gotten worse. We saw the media covering for Joe Biden. The very same media now covering for Kamala Harris. Time and time again, the media says it's not really true. We're not really in the tank for them. Now, we all know it is true, but the media says they're not. They could prove us wrong by covering the story, but they don't want to cover the story because it could potentially jeopardize Tammy Baldwin's reelection. She's not a supremely popular politician in Wisconsin, and Erick Hovde's pretty popular. They're attacking Erick Hovde for supposed tax evasion, which isn't true, and yet this is a true story that they won't even cover. Republicans, the point here is this. One, we should put these issues on the radar. Two, we should remember the Democrats are held to a double standard. And three, we should speak loudly to force these things to be covered, because eventually when we speak loud enough and cover these ourselves enough, the media can't help but cover them. Whether it's the Tim Walz story about his lying about his record in the military, or something like this. If you continue to beat the drum on it, eventually the media has to do it so at least they can check the box and say they've done it. And the moment they do it, it allows the story to expand even further. But yes, this is a sitting United States senator who is in a lesbian long-term relationship, who has clear conflicts of interest and will not file the disclosure she would have to file if she's married, because she can say, well, we're not married, even though they live together and share a condo together and have been in a long-term relationship. It is an appalling double standard that the media, if they were Republicans, would expose. Media should be doing its job. Instead, we have to do it for them.